This is Patrick Dolence with another presentation for ISECON 104, Introductory Macroeconomics. In this presentation, our focus will be on the concept of money. We will begin by defining money as the concept is used by economists. From there, we'll explore the idea that the origins of money are shrouded in history, even though most textbooks will tell one traditional story. In fact, upon closer scrutiny, that story doesn't hold up so well. But let's begin with the question of what is money. In economics, we believe that anything that serves three functions qualifies as money on some level. The first of these functions is a medium of exchange. When economists say medium of exchange, they simply mean that it facilitates transactions in the marketplace. The second function of money is the store of value. Store of value is the idea that an asset can accumulate or hold value for future purchases. The third function that money serves is a unit of account. By unit of account, we simply mean that money represents a yardstick or a way to measure prices. To compare all the different prices in the marketplace, money provides a useful surface. Let's apply these three criteria to see what money looks like concretely. For each of the following examples, see how well you can determine whether or not the functions are being met. In the first case, these $100 bills with Benjamin Franklin's picture on them, we can all readily agree that those represent money. We know that you can spend $100 bills, and we know that you can save $100 bills. So, dollar bills represent both a medium of exchange and a store of value. What about this example? This is a $25 US savings bond. Can you spend a savings bond? Technically, you can't. If the pizza boy arrives at 11 o'clock on a Friday night with a hot pizza for you and your housemates, can you use a savings bond to buy the pizza? I doubt it. Because savings bonds can be used to store value, they may seem to you as if they represent money. But because you can't spend them, they fail on the medium of exchange criteria. So therefore, savings bonds would not be considered money. Let's try a third example, a credit card. Is a credit card money? Well, a credit card satisfies the first function. We can definitely use credit cards as a medium of exchange. Transactions are facilitated by credit cards all the time. What about the second value? Does a credit card represent a store of value? No. In fact, a credit card is a pre-approved loan, an arrangement that you've made with the company that issued the credit card, but you cannot accumulate or save value for future purchases using a credit card, and so therefore a credit card does not qualify as money because it fails the second test. Let's try one more example. How about a debit card? Does a debit card qualify as money? Well, a debit card can indeed be used as a medium of exchange. People use debit cards to facilitate transactions every single day. So far, so good. Does the debit card represent a store of value? Well, this time the answer is yes, because the debit card in your wallet is tied specifically to your checking account. And if you make a series of deposits in your checking account over a series of pay periods and you don't withdraw, then your checking account is accumulating value. And when you use your debit card, you will have much more purchasing power than you did before. So a debit card does in fact satisfy our criteria as money. Debit cards are money, credit cards are not. Let's move on to the origins of money. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there are in fact two different stories. This may seem somewhat surprising to you, especially if you spend some time surveying introductory macroeconomics textbooks, because virtually every single book that could be used for a course like this would tell one standard story. Indeed, that's the story that we're going to explore, or at least introduce, in this video. It's known as the neoclassical view for our purposes, but you could also call it the orthodox view or the traditional view. It's also useful for you to know, at least at this point, that there is a second perspective which we will name the post-Keynesian view. The post-Keynesian view is a little more complicated, but almost certainly a better, more accurate description of what history actually had happened. We won't get to that view in this video, but we'll explore it in a future presentation. Let's talk about the neoclassical view. The neoclassical view almost certainly has its origins in the work of Adam Smith. Adam Smith, as you'll recall, is the architect of the theory of the invisible hand, and by most accounts, the father of modern economics. In Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, there is a famous quote where he says, "There's a certain propensity in human nature, the propensity to truck, barter, and exchange one thing for another." He goes on in that section to elaborate and say that human beings are different from other creatures because we seem to be hardwired for exchange. Why is that important? Well, from Adam Smith's perspective, and from the perspective of economists who come after Adam Smith, our inner desire to trade, to exchange, to bargain is the origin of the market. And if this is in fact part of what it means to be human, then, economists reason, it would stand to be the case that in all times and all places, people like to trade. Well, on the basis of that starting assumption, the neoclassical view would argue that in the beginning, people barter. We'll talk more about barter in a minute, but if you assume that human beings are hardwired to trade, to negotiate, to exchange, then barter is a logical first step. Following barter, the neoclassicals believe, comes commodity money. We'll talk more about commodity money in a future presentation. Commodity money then logically leads to fractional reserve banking, which is the culmination of our survey of money in lectures to come. Let's return to barter and explore that concept a little bit more before we end this presentation. In the beginning, so say the economists, there was no money, but people had this inner desire to trade, to exchange, to find ways to swap goods or services with one another. We know that barter, in fact, represents this direct trading or direct exchanging. Barter, however, in this context, presents a problem. Imagine, if you will, that I'm frantically interested in getting a meal before the end of today, and I have no money. In fact, I don't live in a world with money, so I have to rely on barter. What can I do? Well, I think to myself, I have a service that I can trade. I could explain the Keynesian cross model. I could explain the Keynesian cross model with the one-sector equilibrium, the two-sector equilibrium, the three-sector equilibrium, and I could even explain how to find and use the multiplier. Surely that's worth something, and off I go. As I arrive at my first stop, perhaps Bagel Works on Main Street in Keene, I say, I'd like some food, I'd like a meal, and I'm willing to explain the Keynesian cross model to you in trade. And then what happens? Well, you know exactly what happens. Nobody at Bagel Works actually wants or needs to hear a story about the Keynesian cross. And because they don't want what I have, we haven't got a trade. That notion of the other party wanting what I have at the same time that I want what they have is what economists refer to as a double coincidence of wants. Barter requires this in order to be successful. Let's return to our story and see why this is a problem. Perhaps the folks at Bagel Works are not going to just immediately throw me out of their store, but instead will offer me a proposition. We would be willing to trade you the meal that you're looking for in exchange for cupcakes from down on the square at the Life is Sweet candy shop. Ah, I can make this work, I say, and off I go to the candy shop. As I walk into Life is Sweet and start to tell my Keynesian cross story in hopes of bartering for the cupcakes, which I can then use to trade for the meal that I want, I'm immediately greeted with the same problem. They don't need what I have. But, they say, if barter is what you're interested in, we would be willing to trade the cupcakes that you want for a grande latte from Starbucks. Off I go to Starbucks in search of the latte which I can trade for the cupcakes which I can trade for the meal at Bagel Works, which is what I really wanted. You get the idea. Indeed, if Keynesian cross model is all that I have to trade, I probably am not going to find anybody in town willing to make that exchange. But if I do, there's a bigger issue here, which is that barter is going to require lots more work for me to get what I actually want, simply because this double coincidence of wants is not likely to happen very often. So, economists conclude, barter is inefficient. It requires too much time. It takes too much effort. It would be so much simpler if we could agree on a standard monetary unit that everybody is willing to trade for, and all of a sudden, all of those transactions, which we desperately, frantically want because we're hardwired to trade with one another, all of those transactions become much easier to make. And that, say the economists, is why money emerges.